Elevator Systems, Bowen Family Systems Theory in brief for a life of learning. Welcome to Elevator Systems, the podcast that looks at Bowen Family Systems Theory ideas and concepts in brief and understandable ways. This season, we are looking at relationships throughout life, and today we're talking about relationships with coworkers. Our guest today is Jake Morrill. Jake is the founder of Generation to Generation Leadership Coaching, which works with family, businesses, congregations, and nonprofits. He's a longtime student of Bowen Theory and is on the faculty of the Bowen Center in Washington, where he's one of the teachers of the course Differentiation at Work. Jake grew up in East Tennessee and still lives there near family. He and his wife Molly are parents of 2 young adult sons. Thanks for joining us, Jake.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Well, you get the first pitch. Bowen Theory at Work.
Okay. So I've been using this, what I think of as a simple, punchy idea for the last year, ever since I heard it from John Engels, and I want to give attribution. This is his idea that I'm sharing, and it's quite simple. It's, this is me, who are you? And as I share it with coaching clients, as a simple discipline for putting differentiation of self into the room, this is me is the challenge and the invitation for me to represent myself, to show up and say, this is what I think, this is what I see, this is what I believe, what I will do, won't do. A lot of that will be familiar to students of Bowen Theory. What I think is interesting, or the juice in this for me, is the second part. Who are you? So often I get caught in the trap of thinking for other people, telling stories about them. If I adopt the discipline of simply asking, of when I turn to the other, of trying to draw out of them what they see and think, then it is both upholding the humility and objectivity to which I aspire, since I actually can't read minds. But it goes a far way into staying connected with the actual person rather than the fiction I've created of who they are.
Right.
Yeah, that's great. I appreciate we doing this topic because I think I underestimate that I spend probably the majority of my life with coworkers, probably maybe more time sometimes when I think about it than my own family and friends. And it's a way to think about being in an environment with people we might not choose to be in relationship with. So I thought the concept that I was going to talk about was one that is dear to my heart, which is over and under functioning. I've worked most of my life in nonprofit work, in helping professions, a place where I think people who tend to get in the reciprocal pattern of over functioning for others wind up in those careers, or that's my observation. So I think it's useful for me in thinking about being in leadership, even before I was in leadership, thinking about over and under functioning as a reciprocal process. So this is the part that I really wanted to think with people about, is that I think sometimes I will just say I'm an overfunctioner, which is not true in all of my relationships. So I think paying attention when in my work relationships about that reciprocal process of over and under functioning is, what part am I playing if I'm projecting on the other person that they're under functioning? And so really that's the concept that I wanted to bring to this conversation. So kind of get clearer, related to Jake's, get clear in managing and defining myself and putting less energy into focusing on other people picking up. So that was my thought.
That's
on
great.
A good day, I said.
Well, as a chronic underfunctioner, my anxiety is already rising.
Excellent. Gonna live it out right here.
Yeah.
Dixie, what have you got for your pitch?
Yeah, my pitch looks at a concept that we haven't touched yet this season, which is societal emotional process, which is the idea that the processes that manage tension and anxiety in families are also at play in broader social groups. And I was thinking that work relationships aren't just with the people you breathe the same air or you're on the same Zoom call as, but that most workplaces have many different relationship systems, areas of responsibility, levels of hierarchy that all keep the workplace functioning, and the dynamics in each of those areas will influence the others. And it goes beyond the workplace, which I think 2025 is a clear example of how society impacts the workplace, not even your own country, but the comments of leaders impacts the global markets, the resources that can be shipped, which industries see layoffs or growth. And so I appreciate that Bowen Theory has a way to observe, predict, and work to navigate these big and small work systems. And then one more. I get to do two because this podcast was my idea. So today I get two. Really quickly, a question that I often ask clients is, how do they know the difference between professionalism and pseudo-self in themselves? What's the difference? So that was mine from Dr. Bowen. There's a video from 1987 on the archives page, which I will link to, where he said to a colleague, are you going to run a department the way you think it ought to be run, or are you going to run it the way the rest of the nation thinks it should be run? Are you going to be you, or are you going to be a pseudo-self whose self is determined by all of the other people out there? So that was his comment, which is very interesting. One comment from family therapy and clinical practice. Very quickly, I learned that if there was an emotional issue in the organization, I was playing a part in it. And if I could modify the part I was playing, the others would do the same. It's been useful in my life, in my family, in my clinical work, and administrative functioning. Anytime one key member of an organization can be responsibly responsible for self, the problem in the organization will resolve. A quote from Leslie Ann Fox and Catherine Gratwick Baker. The emotional system is the way all the people in the organization relate to each other, respond to each other, react to each other, encourage each other, and get on each other's nerves. It's the silent buzz you feel in the air when you get off the elevator, and it creates what we call the hidden challenge of leadership because people are so rarely aware of it. And finally, Kathleen Smith from a podcast that I listened to, where I will link in the show notes. You can't just look at how calm a group is and assume that it's functioning well, that work is getting done, because maybe everybody is just distant and walking on eggshells. All right. What do you notice? Yeah.
I've appreciated the idea of, that you kind of punched up in one, I think it was one of Bowen's who said, knowing kind of the history of the organization. I think that's been an area where I've been caught off guard in the past in different organizations where I just didn't know all the triangles. I guess no one talked about triangles. I think, one of the things that I always get interested in organizations and coworkers is thinking about the triangles that everybody is involved in and how that will impact their functioning and my functioning and my reactivity.
I'm thinking about the quote from 1987, the Bowen tape that you were mentioning about the relationship between being a professional and pseudo-self. For a chapter of my life, I was working with people in the military, in the U.S. Army. And then more recently, in this last year, I've been working with conservative Jewish rabbis. And in both cases, these are people who have agreed to certain frameworks to uphold certain commitment, not only of duty, but also of perspective, or to represent on behalf of these larger bodies, whether the Army or conservative Judaism. And I think for me, the salient variable is choice rather than creativity, because in conservative Judaism, a rabbi who just decides to start from scratch and come up with their own interpretations, or in the Army, somebody who just decides to create their own policies or their own commands, I would not see as mature necessarily. I'd see that as rogue, as cut off from the prior commitments. And I do think that in the workspace there are prior commitments, regardless of how conservative or structured or formless. But I do think that maturity for me is the extent to which someone takes responsibility for upholding that which they did not themselves decide from scratch. It is the decision to represent, the decision to uphold, the decision to implement. You know, a middle manager in a large corporation, I think, can be mature or immature. And it's not that they've scrapped what directive their boss told them, nor is it blindly passing on, you know, directives from on high. It's so I just, for me, it's looking at the, how much can they own it? How much does it square with their sense of integrity?
Yeah.
That individuality, togetherness piece, in a sense, right? And how to thoughtfully, do you have choice in which of the things you toe the line or hold the framework that you need to be a part of? Is that
Well,
kind of
I mean, I think people always have choices. And I think that one of the choices is to not work there anymore. I mean, the idea that my boss made me or that anyone made me, I never buy. I think it is always a choice, and a choice made with calculations. And
yeah,
I don't think that that standard asks people to be heroes or martyrs. I think, you know, ethics is always stacking competing values against each other. So a choice could be,
right,
I'm not going to fight this fight because I want to feed my family. You know,
right,
there's a certain honor to that. And then if it's passing on terrible things or passing on things that are beyond what I am willing to take responsibility for passing on, then I think it's another choice. Then it's, you know, I don't know. What do you all think when it comes to those things?
I mean, this had me so reflecting on, I spent many a years in middle management, and I think it is an interesting place to watch your own thinking. You know, I appreciate that, of how I got clearer about myself and how I would respond reactively, maybe, and just do the thing my boss asked me to do. I also think that's so interesting that the function of middle management is often that filter of communication. So it's already creating a triangle that isn't the one-to-one relationship between the boss and the employee, potentially, that they're creating the policy about, is what I'm thinking of specifically. And how do you think about how you're going to communicate something that aligns with your thinking? My mind's going in a lot of different places, so I don't know if I have a really good grasping example, but I'm thinking about just the policies that would change at a counseling agency I was working at, and how I would be able to communicate my thinking. And here is what the policy is that I am happy to accept, because this is where our funding source is coming from, and how do we go forward with that? So that's got me thinking.
I think for me, in the utopia of a completely aligned organization, I think in terms of concentric circles, where the outer concentric circle is the person at the top of the organizational chart articulating values, vision, direction, and that any middle manager or any person in between, whoever is stapling the papers or doing whatever task, is simply narrowing, not trying to buffer or mask or translate the vision, but simply implementing it at a smaller level, from vision to strategy to tactic to task, or something like that. I had a challenge. This is 15 years ago. I was on a national board. I was often in the minority with votes on some particular area. And then I was asked to turn around and represent the outcomes of these processes. This was at a time of a lot of change and turmoil, and it was important to be a spokesperson. So I was asked to represent decisions which I personally had voted against. And well, I was going to say that was a challenge for me. It wasn't really a challenge, but I had to think it through, though, because I was not able with integrity to be a booster to really sell this thing, but nor would I want to. So I think what I tried to do was to represent the outcomes of these decisions and the way that the organization was going in a way that I thought was fair-minded. And depending on this, and sometimes I'd leave it there. Depending on the context, sometimes I would say, this is not something that I personally, if I ran the zoo, I would have chosen differently. And I respect the process. I was there at the table. I saw the thoughtfulness, the transparency, the fidelity to democracy. So I can vouch that this is actually the outcome of the organization. As somebody who lost the vote, I'm telling you, this is majority wins. So there you go. I tried to do things like that. And I guess I don't know.
I guess what I was thinking about with that is ways is to think about, how you define yourself as a worker, however you want to use that. Because I think getting clear for yourself about that role, where do I get reactive? Where, am I the kind of person who's always pushing against the leadership? Do I know that about myself? Do I like a really clear direction? How do I get as clear about how I function as a worker, who I get, I just think thinking that through and then paying attention to the job description and the organization that you're signing on for, and just the thoughtfulness in how much do those align, how much do they not. As I get into a position, is there a job description, or is it my responsibility to kind of think that through, and how does my boss understand their function in relationship to me? How do I understand that? So I think, these defining of roles were something that I was putting down as my takeaway, but I think it's useful for just taking the time to think that through.
Me too. Yeah. And some of the times when I've been most pleased in working with organizations is when people are willing to manage up, to come to their boss and to say, this is who I am. This is what's important to me. This doesn't work for me, and that need not be insubordination. That could be further clarification, or it could be renegotiation. You all go and do these things. I won't be able to do that with integrity, something like that. I had a moment like this, and from the outside, I know that I have less pressures than somebody who's working within an organization. So I just want to concede that or acknowledge that. I'm a little looser, yeah, because I'm just dropping in. But recently, as part of a termination process, I was asked to facilitate the agreement of the one heading out of the organization, that this person would agree to a version of events that I knew was not true or was not the whole story, in such a way that created a misimpression. And so I thought about it, and I thought, I am committed to coaching toward differentiation. I am working toward differentiation myself. My great hope is that the other person will get an inch or two closer themselves. And the idea of facilitating falsehood or facilitating compromised integrity or the agreement to a falsehood, that's not something I'm willing to do. And that for me was at risk of some money. And I like to think that in this high emotions process of if it had been a matter of fact easy process, they wouldn't have called me in. So I like to think that my capacity after some thinking, to represent myself like that, helped others or challenged others to do likewise.
Yeah, I think of short-term versus long-term consequences of being honest in that process, for you, for the organization. When you gave your example before of how you sort of worked on yourself, is what are the immature options? Like, what can it automatically look like when people go for the blame or the half truths?
Mm-hmm.
And what are the consequences?
Yeah. I'm interested, Katie, in hearing about, a moment when you say you were in middle management. I have not been in that spot. So
Ah.
what was a time where you really had a dilemma and you had to work out, what was the right and durable decision for you?
I'm going to give one that I would imagine any other person who's listening to this who has been in middle management at a publicly funded counseling agency would have come up against
Mm-hmm.
is the challenge of this sounds very crass, but more butts in the seats because
Uh-huh.
our funding needs to report more clients coming through
Mm-hmm.
versus maybe a little long-term service with these smaller groups of clients
Mm-hmm.
will benefit
Mm.
Yeah.
these clients in a more robust way. And
Mm.
I think that every counseling agency I've worked at is up against this challenge of and with a real threat, like if we could lose funding.
Mm-hmm.
But my principle and the tension that would come from the counselors would be, this isn't helpful. We don't agree with this. We don't want to close out clients that we don't feel like are done with their services. And so it was something that I think is a tension that would exist in that middle management where my manager would be saying this, all these things about the funding. She's looking at it from that side that the funding has to come. We need to support this. This is important. How do we communicate this? So one of the things I found, and I don't know that I definitely wouldn't say that I've solved this. I'd
Mm-hmm.
probably be doing lots of consulting in
Mhm.
the world if I was doing that. But I think it was so useful for me. And the thing that I didn't know that I was drawing from Bowen Theory at the time, but the thing that I found was so useful is the one-to-one relationships with each side. Or your statement, which I've already gotten. Here's me. Tell me
Mm-hmm.
about you. Was that what it was, Jake?
Yeah, this is me. Who are you? That's the John Ingalls
Yes.
Mm.
line. Yeah.
Mhm.
So some things that take more time in organizations, like as opposed
Mm.
to we're having a big staff meeting and we're
Mm-hmm.
delivering this news.
Mm-hmm.
Finding time and supervision to talk with people about their challenges, that was a real resource to me in those things. I don't know if I answered your question, but that was
Yeah,
what I found.
I appreciate that. Creating a context where I'm hearing you say where it's less black white and it's less right now. All these markers of anxiety where leadership often looks like slowing down, opening up, and yeah, just seeing the whole thing. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Mm.
I mean, I think for me this really powerful lesson came long ago when somebody who I was supervising was not terrible, but was not acceptable. Like his
Mm.
performance, he was just kind of like barely, barely, barely. And, it had been 3 years, and I just found myself so resentful, just and for me, resentment is the marker of helplessness. There's just a
Yeah.
link between those. So I said, okay, what's happening? And I think that I was looking for a sign from above or a lightning bolt or something that would say, this person is here forever and I want to develop him, or this person needs an off ramp. And what I
Mm.
figured out was it was a 60-40 decision that he needed to go. And yet, to make a decision and to own that decision and to communicate out, I have made a decision that's not a slam dunk, that's not black and white. This person has contributed, a lot. And for where we're going, it is insufficient. And, this
Mm.
person seems unresponsive or unwilling, as far as I can tell, to shift, which I respect. Everybody gets to choose. And so I am deciding that this person will no longer work here and that I am going to be hiring somebody who is,
Yeah.
more responsive to where things are headed. And boy, that was liberating.
Mm.
Now, you said at the start you default to underfunctioning. How much did you get into the overfunctioning with trying to help
Oh,
this guy pick up, do you
oh
think?
yeah. Yeah, I'm sure I did. I mean, there was one, working with a coach who was encouraging me to work on my relationship with him. So I was taking this guy got some really nice dinners out of this. I was whining and dining, and he was just having a good time. Like, oh, this is, evincing no desire to shift his basic, like. So yes, I did get into that. And I also, probably for more in that period, I was just avoiding. I was turning my eyes, I was pretending, I was not dealing with it. So in that sense,
Right.
underfunctioning.
Yeah.
And in not dealing with it, I was allowing others to, I was at the top of the food chain. So my choice to pretend peace was the choice to allow others in the organization to experience the pain of this undealt with problem. So that was great.
But you brought up another thing is I think in this coworkers discussion, there would have to be a discussion of some of this involves sitting in discomfort or doing things that make us pretty uncomfortable, which can be at the heart of differentiation, right? That I as a boss sometimes might need to fire someone, and that might be quite uncomfortable for me, or I as an employee might need to come into my boss's office and say, I'm not okay with doing this. And that might be really uncomfortable. And I think, the effort and the thinking that can go into that, managing that discomfort is important.
Absolutely. I don't know of any kind of significant growth that avoids discomfort. There's no way out but through is something that I say to clients all the time. Wouldn't it be nice if you could close your eyes or go on vacation and come back and it's dealt with? And as a consultant, I have to say, as somebody coming in from the outside, I have to watch how much their responsibility is trying to be outsourced to me. Because as much as I would love to come in and play hero, that actually, I think, weakens the system. And also, it's not a sustainable intervention. At best, I won't say that I've done this perfectly, but I've been working to coach people to get back in there and re-engage, hopefully equipped with their thoughts and their words for their problem. But people sometimes want to write checks for me to do what is theirs to do.
And what an invitation.
Yeah.
Come in. Yeah. I mean, I think about that with a parallel with family therapy, right? Come in and fix us up.
Right.
And how do you know the difference between someone who just needs a vacation or a stress leave? Or my silly example was, I mean, it's in 1,000 movies, but in the movie Elf, where suddenly, like, that last Christmas Eve scene and the dad's like, I'm leaving this meeting, I have to go, right? Because the son comes and bangs on the door. And that balance between work obligations and family obligations, how do people begin to think through what's needed in balancing all of these things? Because it's family, it's finances, it's your CV, plus what work requires.
Well, this might echo some of what Katie was saying earlier about slowing things down. There can be, in organizational life, such a bias toward action that it can become compulsive, and that busyness is valorized and thinking is undervalued. Murray Bowen wrote about getting away from what was then the family center, and then in the parking lot, pulling back up, experiencing a rise in his own anxiety. I think it can be useful for leaders to step away, and I just think the real work comes back on scene when I am taking a deep breath, working on regulating. So part of my work is with clergy, and some clergy get sabbaticals. And so I hear often, oh, I'm burned out, I just have 6 more months to sabbatical. I don't think that that's a sustainable solution, to go from because at most they come every 5 years, and that's in a generous
Mm-hmm.
package. And so, and
Mm,
most of the world doesn't get sabbaticals, or working for the weekend, I guess, is the week by week
yeah.
version.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And what I talk with them about is, what does it look like to incorporate whatever a sabbatical is into your daily life? And how much are you, especially if you're higher up on the organizational chart with more complexity and a broader view of variables to countenance, how much time are you using for thinking, are using for reflecting,
Mm.
and just working through um, these questions and dilemmas, especially people who've grown up where hard work means swinging a hammer or fixing something
Yeah.
or doing something. I think that childhood script can be a problem when they are an executive or, in a role of leadership, which has a lot to do with thinking and planning and sorting. And yeah.
Part of my emphasis again and my takeaway in deciding what kind of worker you are, who will have the pressure often from maybe the multi-generational fact,
Mm-hmm.
maybe within the company, the goal is to keep going up, 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 up. And this recognition that I don't want to be a manager.
Yeah.
I've worked with nurses who are like, I don't want to manage the organization. I want to sit at the bedside. This is what I enjoy about this work. Or
Mm-hmm.
people who think I have to go into executive, and executive, yes, means more money, but it means I'm going to have to work
Mm-hmm.
significantly more hours, and I have young children and I would prefer to be spending time with my children. And I think some of these things where it is getting clear in what your own thinking is versus the projection, maybe society, maybe your family of origin, about climbing that ladder and taking some time to think for yourself. What am I interested in? What works for
Mm-hmm.
me and my system?
Yeah. Yeah. I am married to someone who has assiduously refused promotions throughout her career because she knows she wants to work directly with people, and she doesn't want to work three steps back from
Yeah.
from that. And I really respect that. I
Hmm.
think there's this perverse thing that happens in the workplace where the hardest worker, the fastest answerer, the biggest hustler, the most competent gets recognized for promotion. This is, I guess, just the Peter principle. People get promoted beyond their competence, but leadership is such a profoundly different skill set and way of engaging work than doing. And so people who
Mm.
are subject matter experts, who've been rewarded their whole lives for knowing the answers, now are asked to ask questions. People who are individual contributors, whether in sales or some kind of production, are just used to cranking, 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 and now are challenged with somehow eliciting productivity out of others. And it's like orthogonal to what they've practiced and learned and been rewarded with. And I do think that there is a choice point there. And
Yeah.
that's maybe where back to what you all were talking about earlier about, just owning the quote about running the department as themselves, versus how the rest
Right.
of the country thinks. I think
Yeah.
there's so much more creativity, so many more options for people to invent or negotiate their roles in the workplace than often the givens
Hmm.
that they assume or the constraints they assume.
That.
And it takes conversations.
Yeah.
Darn it.
Takes your right. Takes your pitch. This is me. Who are you?
Yeah.
Right. To
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
find that out. Yeah. Jake, do you have any takeaways for people or things for them to keep thinking about?
Yeah. I mean, I do think if people take their boss out to lunch and really, as if they are meeting this person for the first time, try to get to know who this person is, what is important to them, what they hope for, what they fear, what they worry about. That kind of investment in relationship, especially with one's supervisor or boss, I think begins to make one's own work much more coherent. It creates a
Hmm.
context for the directives that one's receiving. So that's a takeaway I'd float.
I love that. My husband's a pastor, so does that mean he goes out for supper with Jesus and tries to figure some
Now and then, I know some pastors who fit that in every couple of months. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, my takeaway, Kathleen Smith's book, Everything Isn't Terrible, has a whole section on, it's called Your Anxious Career, from your choice, from changing jobs, leadership. So I will link that. And then she had 2 podcasts. I took a break today so I could find my creativity. Like Katie reminded me, I walked the bison path in my little town and listened to these 2 Kathleen Smith work podcasts. So I will also link those for people. Yeah. Anything else?
I was going to say one more thing. I said Jake wrote this useful book that I wanted to put a plug in, that I liked, the Boundaries Workbook. But I also, for the extra people who are really who really dive deep into Bowen Theory, there is a Bowen Theory, a little small volume on organizations that is a real, I've found quite useful. So we can link that in there for people who really want to dive in a little deeper. It's old, but there's a lot of really useful presentations. I think they were presentations that were translated into chapters that have lots of good thinking in there.
Excellent. Well, thanks for being with us, Jake.
My pleasure. Thank you all for this conversation and for this podcast. What a great resource.
Thank you.
Great. Yeah. So I hope people found this episode useful and sparking some areas of curiosity as you go out into your work relationships. This podcast is produced by Living Systems, a nonprofit organization in Vancouver offering counseling and training programs in Bowen family systems theory across Canada.